The quiet kind. Daniel Reyes was folding laundry when he heard his daughter scream. It wasn't the scream of a scraped knee or a spider in the bathtub. Daniel had heard both of those in his time, and he knew the difference the way a piano tuner knows the difference between a note that's flat and one that's simply wrong. This scream had teeth in it. It came from the front porch, and it was cut short, swallowed like a hand had closed over her mouth. He was through the kitchen and out the screen door in 4 seconds, still holding one of her folded t-shirts, which he would later find crushed in his own fist, the fabric printed with a cartoon fox. A man stood at the bottom of the porch steps, one hand wrapped around Mia's upper arm, the other hovering near her shoulder like he hadn't decided yet whether to grab her again. He was maybe 35, broad through the chest, wearing a jacket too heavy for the September evening, the kind of jacket that told you he was hiding something underneath it or he simply liked people to wonder. Mia was 14. Her backpack had fallen off one shoulder and hung there, half open, a math textbook sliding halfway out. "Let go of her," Daniel said. He didn't raise his voice. That was the first thing people always got wrong about him. Before they knew better, they expected shouting. The man's eyes flicked over Daniel, 50-something, gray at the temples, cardigan sweater, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. A man who looked like he spent his evenings grading papers or refinishing furniture. The man smiled, small and mean. "You heard Dad," he said. "Good. Then you can pass along a message. Tell your girl to keep her mouth shut about what she saw Tuesday night, or next time I won't be so polite about asking." He gave Mia's arm a shake for emphasis, and she gasped, and something in Daniel went very still and very cold, the way deep water goes still right before it closes over your head. "Take your hand off my daughter," Daniel said, "and then we'll talk about being polite." The man laughed, an ugly, confident sound, and that was his first mistake. 3 days earlier, a black SUV had run a stop sign 4 blocks from Roosevelt Middle School and clipped the rear panel of a parked minivan hard enough to spin it a quarter turn. Mia had been walking home from volleyball practice, earbuds in, when the crash made her look up in time to see the driver, the same man now gripping her arm, climb out, glance around, and pop the trunk. She'd seen him transfer 2 duffel bags into a second car idling nearby before both vehicles pulled away, the SUV's plates smeared with mud that hadn't been there 30 seconds earlier. She hadn't thought much of it. Fender benders happened. People swapped cars for 100 boring reasons. She'd mentioned it to her friend Ashley at lunch the next day, the way you mention any small, strange thing, and then forgotten about it entirely. She had no way of knowing that the SUV had been stolen 11 hours earlier from a used lot in Tulsa, or that the duffel bags contained $40,000 in cash skimmed from a fentanyl operation running product up through 3 states, or that the man driving it, whose name, though Mia didn't know this yet either, was Curtis Wallman, had spent the last 2 days quietly asking around the neighborhood, flashing a fake insurance adjuster badge, trying to find out if anyone had gotten a good look at him that evening. A neighbor with a doorbell camera had mentioned, unhelpfully and without malice, that the Ray's girl had been out walking around that time. Curtis had put it together from there. He wasn't a professional. He was scared, and increasingly desperate people, Daniel knew, made increasingly stupid choices. Daniel didn't know any of this yet either, standing on his porch steps in a cardigan sweater. All he knew was that a stranger had his hand on his daughter and was smiling about it. "Or what?" Curtis said. "You gonna call the cops on me, Mr. Cardigan? Go ahead. By the time they get here, I'll be 3 miles gone, and I'll come back some night when you're not home, and this pretty thing," he glanced at Mia, and Daniel felt his own pulse thud once hard in his throat, "won't have her daddy around to play hero." "I'm not going to call the cops," Daniel said. Something in his tone made Curtis's smile falter, just slightly, the way a man's smile falters when he tells a joke and the room doesn't laugh. "That's supposed to scare me." "No," Daniel said. "It's supposed to be accurate. Let go of her arm. This is the last time I'm going to say it politely." Curtis let go, but not out of obedience. He let go because he needed both hands free, because some old animal instinct in him had finally caught up to what his eyes had been telling him for the last 10 seconds. That the older man on the porch steps hadn't moved his weight the way a scared homeowner moves his weight. He'd shifted his stance, low and balanced, the folded t-shirt held loose and forgotten in his left hand, his right hand open and ready at his side. Men who spend their lives behind desks don't stand like that. Men who spend careers waiting for a door to open the wrong way stand like that. Curtis reached under his jacket. Daniel closed the distance in under a second, a fact that would astonish Curtis later. Lying on his back in the grass with his wrist bent at an angle wrists aren't meant to bend, trying to remember exactly what had happened and coming up only with a blur, a sensation like being hit by a car that had somehow also been polite about it. Daniel's hand closed over Curtis's forearm before the gun, a cheap 9mm, safety still on, because Curtis Wallman had bought it 2 years ago and never once trained with it, even cleared the jacket. Daniel turned the wrist with a motion so economical it looked almost gentle, and Curtis screamed and dropped to his knees, and the gun thumped onto the porch boards, and Daniel kicked it away without looking, the way another man might kick a soccer ball out of the path of a stroller, an afterthought, a chore. "Mia," Daniel said, still not raising his voice, still holding Curtis's arm bent at that terrible angle. "Go inside. Lock the door. Call 911 and tell them your dad has a man detained on the front porch, and ask for Sergeant Alvarez if he's on shift." Mia, who had never once in 14 years of life seen her father move like that, who had known him only as the man who burned pancakes and cried at her dance recitals and fell asleep during every single movie they ever tried to watch together, stood frozen for exactly 1 second. "Mia," Daniel said again, gentler now, though his grip on Curtis's arm didn't loosen even a fraction. "Go on, baby. I've got this." She went. Curtis Wallman was face down on the porch, one arm zip-tied behind him with a cable tie Daniel kept in a drawer by the door, a habit from another life. The kind of habit you don't break even 15 years into retirement. By the time the first patrol car turned onto the street, lights spinning silent and red-blue against the darkening houses. "Ma'am, sir, we got a call," the young officer started, hand still on his holster, taking in the scene. A man zip-tied on a porch, a pistol sitting 6 feet away on the welcome mat, and a 52-year-old man in a cardigan sweater sitting calmly on the porch swing like he was waiting for a bus. "Evening," Daniel said. "Gun's his, safety's on, I haven't touched it since I kicked it clear. He's got a dislocated wrist, might want to call it in to whoever picks him up. Threatened my daughter, pulled a firearm on me in my own yard. I'd like to give a statement whenever's convenient." The officer, Ramirez, according to his name tag, looked at Daniel for a long moment. Something about the man's stillness, his precision, the exact and unhurried way he'd laid out the facts like reciting a grocery list, made the hair on the back of Ramirez's neck stand up in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. He'd seen that particular calm exactly twice before in his 4 years on the force. Once in a bomb tech, once in his own training sergeant, a man who'd done 2 tours as an Army Ranger before putting on a badge. "You military, sir?" "No," Daniel said. "U.S. Marshal service, retired 6 years now. Fugitive task force mostly out of the Western District before that, some time with SOG. He said it the way another man might mention he used to sell insurance. "You'll want to run him, Curtis something, didn't catch a last name against any open warrants out of Tulsa. There was a hit and run near Roosevelt Middle a few nights back involving a stolen SUV, and unless I'm wrong, that's what tonight was actually about. My daughter saw something she didn't know she saw." Ramirez glanced at his partner. His partner had already stopped writing and was just starring. "You want to run that badge number for me, sir? Force of habit." Daniel almost smiled. Force of habit's a hard thing to shake. I don't carry the badge anymore, turned it in the day I retired like you're supposed to. But call Sergeant Alvarez. He'll vouch. And you'll want to get someone out to canvass for that SUV before whoever Curtis was running product for realizes he's not calling in tonight. It took less than 40 minutes for the full picture to assemble itself, the way these things do once the right thread gets pulled. Curtis Wallman, priors for possession and one for aggravated assault 8 years back, currently on parole. Currently, as it turned out, 3 weeks behind on payments to a man named Ezra Voss who ran a modest but vicious distribution network across the Oklahoma-Texas-Arkansas corridor, and who had loaned Curtis the job of driving $40,000 in cash from one safe house to another as a way of working off his debt. The stolen SUV, the swapped plates, all standard tradecraft for a man who had none of the discipline the job required. He'd panicked at the accident. He'd panicked worse when he realized a teenage girl might have clocked his face. And in his panic, he'd made the single worst decision of a life built almost entirely out of bad decisions. He'd gone after a 14-year-old girl on her own front porch, in a quiet suburban neighborhood, without bothering to find out one single thing about her father. If he'd spent even 10 minutes doing the kind of homework a smarter, calmer criminal would have done, he would have learned that Daniel Reyes had spent 19 years with the United States Marshal Service, the last 11 of them chasing the worst kind of men across 3 states as part of a special operations group detail that existed specifically to hunt fugitives too dangerous, too well-connected, or too well-armed for local departments to safely bring in. He would have learned that Daniel had walked into farmhouses and drug dens, and one particularly memorable ice fishing shack in Minnesota to retrieve men who did not want to be retrieved, and that he had done so every single time and come home to his daughter's bedtime story every single night. He would have learned that Daniel Reyes had a reputation, in certain rooms, for being the quiet kind, not the kind of federal agent who kicked down doors and shouted, but the kind who simply, calmly, and with total certainty made sure that the outcome he wanted was the outcome that occurred. Curtis Wallman learned none of this beforehand. He learned it in pieces over the next several hours, first from the way his wrist throbbed in the back of the ambulance, then from the careful, almost bemused questions the detectives asked him at the hospital. You tried to pull a gun on who, exactly? And finally, most completely, from his own court-appointed lawyer 2 days later, who slid a printout across the table with a photograph of a much younger Daniel Reyes in Kevlar, standing next to a federal vehicle, flanked by 2 other agents, all 3 of them grinning at something outside the frame. You picked a bad house, the lawyer said, not unkindly. It was, in its way, the most useful legal advice he'd give Curtis all year. Mia sat at the kitchen table that night wrapped in her mother's old college sweatshirt, a mug of hot chocolate going cold in front of her, watching her father through the window as he spoke with 2 more officers in the driveway, his voice too low to carry, his hands moving in small, precise gestures as he walked them through exactly what had happened and exactly what he thought it meant. He looked, she thought, like a man discussing a home repair. Not a man who, 90 minutes earlier, had disarmed an armed stranger in under 2 seconds without so much as raising his pulse. When he finally came back inside, he set the porch light off, locked the deadbolt, checked it twice out of a habit she'd never noticed him have before tonight, and sat down across from her. "You okay?" he asked. "Dad," her voice cracked a little on the word. "What was that?" Daniel exhaled, the first fully human sound he'd made all evening, she realized, the first crack in the calm, and rubbed a hand over his face. "That was your old man," he said, "doing a job he used to be pretty good at. You never told me you were a Marshal, like a real one like the movies." "It wasn't like the movies," Daniel said. "Mostly it was paperwork and long drives and bad coffee. The parts that were like the movies I didn't much enjoy, and I didn't bring them home, because home was supposed to be the place none of that lived." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and she felt, For the first time all night, the faint tremor that had been hiding under his stillness the entire time, now that there was finally no one left to perform calm for. I retired the year you were born, baby girl. I wanted to be a dad who burned pancakes and fell asleep during your movies, not a story you had to be careful telling people at school. Mia looked at him for a long moment, at the cardigan, at the reading glasses still pushed up into his graying hair, at the ordinary, gentle face of the man who had taught her to ride a bike and cried, actually cried, at her 6th grade graduation, and something in her chest that had been clenched tight with fear since the moment that stranger's hand closed around her arm finally, slowly, began to loosen. "You were really scary out there," she said. "I know," Daniel said. "I'm sorry you had to see that side of me." "I'm not," Mia said, and surprised them both by meaning it. "I mean, I am, a little, but mostly I'm glad it was you standing on that porch and not somebody else's dad." Daniel almost smiled. Then, the real thing, not the careful diplomatic version he'd worn all evening for the benefit of patrol officers and detectives. "Me too," he said. "Me too, baby." Curtis Wallman took a plea 11 weeks later, aggravated assault, unlawful possession, and once the Tulsa hit-and-run got tied conclusively to the stolen SUV, accessory charges that added another several years onto a sentence that was already not going to be short. Ezra Voss, the man he'd been driving for, took considerably longer to bring in, 6 months in fact, and it was, by pure coincidence, that Daniel found almost funny in a grim way. 2 of his old colleagues from the fugitive task force who eventually ran him down outside a rental property in Amarillo. Daniel got a phone call about it from his old supervisor, a gruff, kind man named Halloran who'd been trying to talk Daniel into consulting work for 6 years running. "Heard your girl helped crack that whole supply chain wide open," Halloran said, wandering home from volleyball practice. "She's smarter than she knows," Daniel said. "Gets it from her mother." "You sure you don't want to come back part-time? We could use somebody with your instincts on the training side. Teach the new kids how to read a room the way you do." Daniel looked across the living room, where Mia sat curled on the couch doing homework, her socked feet tucked under her, a rerun of some sitcom murmuring low on the television, safe and bored and utterly, wonderfully ordinary. "I appreciate it, Frank," he said, "but I've got a job already, best one I ever had." He hung up the phone, walked over, and sat down next to his daughter, and when she leaned her head against his shoulder without looking up from her math homework, he put his arm around her and did not, for one single second, think about wrist locks or safety catches, or the particular economy of violence required to stop a threat before it became a tragedy. He thought instead about pancakes and bad coffee he no longer had to drink, and the simple, unshowy miracle of an ordinary Tuesday evening at home, with his daughter safe beside him and the porch light burning steady against the dark. Some men are loud about what they'll do to protect the people they love. Daniel Reyes had never been the loud kind. He'd only ever been the kind who showed up, quietly, exactly when it mattered, and made absolutely certain that it was enough. It always had been, it always would be. The end.